Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
Hello everybody, and welcome to episode 146 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host Christian, and I'm joined by our co-host Brad.
Hello everybody.
And our very special guest, fantasy football expert Spencer Howland.
I would not say that that's true. But hi.
Fair enough.
I mean, compared to some people on the podcast, it is true, but...
An unnamed one of us will be victorious in round 2 of the playoffs this week.
Unnamed,
That
but
is
I don't
correct.
play fantasy football.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do the math. Do the math, people.
And I'm losing.
Here's the thing, man. Here's the thing. Is, you gotta pick where to do your crap talking. And you picked a very public place in the form of Twitter. And I picked a less public place in the form of the Easy Game Media Discord. And I think that this just goes to show that if you're gonna talk crap, and you clearly are just worse at fantasy football, you shouldn't do it on Twitter.
So, 1, I was looking to get lucky. 2, if you think Twitter is the most public place I talk crap, I don't know. You must have not seen the clip from the show in which I said that I was going to win in fantasy football.
I have not seen that yet. But also, you guys were like 2 episodes behind.
Fair enough. But before we got too far into this episode, I just want to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by PureMTGO.com. If you'd like to support the show, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. Check out the Common Knowledge Patreon, where you can find Brad's weekly solo show, This Week in Pauper, along with my league videos. With that out of the way, let's get on with the podcast for the week.
I gotta know, what is the Constructive Criticism Network?
The Constructive Criticism Network is a network of great podcasts, starting with our flagship show, Constructive Criticism. I think it's hosted by Mason, Abe, and some other guy.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
And then we also have Homeward Path, which is, I believe, Brad's favorite podcast.
Yeah, it's one of them. Mr. Adam Spain does a solo cast about 45 minutes to an hour each week. It's pretty awesome. Morrow has a Drive to Work podcast, and Adam has a Drive Back Home podcast.
We also have Drafting Archetypes with Sam Black, which
Legend.
is another phenomenal one.
Man, those sound like some great shows. I hope that, people will get the chance to check them out. And I have no stake in any of that, so...
Obviously not.
Completely unbiased opinion coming from me.
Completely. Just an outsider's opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. But Spencer, the first thing that we normally do on the shows is just kind of talk about what decks we've been playing for the past week, what formats we've been playing. Do you want to start us off?
I took this last week to do a couple things in Magic. One of the things that is kind of a benefit of being a host of this show is some guy named Spencer provides you with pauper decks on MTGO, but the hosts of the show don't need that. So I decided to say, forget these guys, and I've transferred all of the pauper cards on the Common Knowledge account to my personal account, and I plan on starting to try and play both pauper leagues and some challenges for pauper. But most of my playing has actually been in two formats, really. It's mostly been Standard and Alchemy, but I did get the chance to kind of play Historic with kind of the recent changes and things like that. It's hard, when you do a podcast like Constructive Criticism, you have to focus on a lot of different stuff. So, this week I recorded a video with Abe Stein, who is my co-host on the show. He offers coaching in Magic, but he actually offers coaching specifically for people who want to learn how to play Hammer Time in Modern. And so I recorded a video that will be up on the YouTube channel with him where he coaches me on how to play Hammer Time. And it's really fun. We're going to do a podcast on Hammer Time here in the near future for patrons of Constructive Criticism. But it was like a pretty fun learning experience to like kind of play with a deck where I've played with most, if not all, of the cards before, but never in this configuration, and kind of getting back into Modern after really not touching the format since the pandemic started.
Heck yeah, man. That sounds like a great past week of Magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, very busy week.
What about you, Brad?
Honestly, I did not. I know we touched on it a little bit in the pre-show. I actually didn't get to play a whole ton of Magic last week, switching over some things at work as far as my roles, my duties, what projects I'm looking
You
over
said
now.
duty.
I said duty. And then just getting things ready for Christmas now. Like I probably mentioned before, this thing at work, it's like a lateral move. It's not necessarily a promotion, but I'll take it because now I have the daily headache of looking at a screen and entering data in as opposed to the daily migraine of babysitting 15 grown-ass men. So I'll take that any day. And then just getting stuff ready for Christmas here at the house. We did a little Christmas lunch and some gifts at work, that sort of thing. So it's been fairly busy on my side, but I got a bunch of time off coming up before the end of the year, and I plan on hitting MTGO pretty hard.
For myself, I also had a pretty busy week, as we kind of talked about before the show. I worked like an absurd amount of hours this past week. But I did get one day with a friend. She actually owns 2 copies of Blue Black Fairies in Pauper. And so we just jammed like 5 or 6 Blue Black Fairy mirrors, which playing paper Magic, even if it's just like one-on-one with a friend, is just so superior to anything else you could possibly be doing.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm considering for 2022 is doing a weekly local popper vlog, because Oasis has like a great popper scene.
I've thought about doing that as well for my shop.
Yeah, like there's something about like people coming to play popper specifically too, where like everyone's really excited, and I really like that atmosphere.
Yep, I agree.
I definitely agree. Next year, they are the local shop that I sometimes go to. They do like a monthly pauper event. And so one of my like resolutions that I've preemptively written down is to go to every single one of them, because it's always like a very consistent day of the month.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's once a month, you said?
It is once a month.
Yeah, that's very doable. That's not bad at all.
But yeah, so that's all the decks and kind of what we've been doing in Magic for this past week. So I guess we can just go ahead and jump into our main topic, which
I think so.
is really just like the intro topic to Spencer's podcast show, which is just always improving.
Yep. Hashtag always improving.
So what we all decided to do is just kind of pick like 3 relatively unique ways or things that we do to kind of go about improving, or just like things to keep in mind. So I figured that we could all just jump on here and kind of discuss. Spencer, did you want to start with what your 3 were?
Yeah, so before I go into mine though, I do want to say that, spoiler, I actually did a YouTube series years ago on the Constructed Criticism YouTube channel that covers some of these in depth. And while my camera situation has gotten better, my mic situation got better, I do think that like in a lot of ways the things that I said there are probably still true, and that while I've gotten better at, I think, communicating this stuff, you definitely can check it out. But my first one I think is the most important one, and it's the one that I did the first video on that playlist on YouTube on, which is actually making the decision to improve at Magic. Pretty often people are like, yeah, I want to get better at something, and this doesn't just have to be like Magic, but just when you want to actively improve and actively participate in anything that you do, if you don't actually make the effort to like make a decision to do that thing and hold yourself accountable to that thing, you're just saying words at that point. Like it's not a actionable thing for you to work on. And so I think that making the decision that like I'm going to spend the time to do the things that I think that I need to do to improve at this game is, for me, the most important thing.
Yeah, so whenever you go about kind of like holding yourself accountable and stuff, in what ways, like in what like measurable ways do you do that?
That's a good question. I think it matters on what your goals are at the time in a lot of ways. So, for example, like one of my goals in Magic right now is kind of one that maybe people wouldn't expect. It's actually to make more disciplined mulligan decisions again. And I think a lot of people would think like, well, shouldn't you just always be doing that? And I think that oftentimes people don't take the time to realize that like it's actually kind of hard to always be thinking about the bare bones basics. And eventually, no matter who you are, it's like you could be John Finkel, Paulo, Sam Party, like eventually you're going to come into bad habits again, and you need to be willing to like take a step back, say, is there something that I'm not doing right now that I know I should be doing, and kind of go from there. And I think that like having an idea of what it is that, you know, those self-reflecting moments is really important, and then, you know, taking stock afterwards. Like I'm the type of person that like, you know, will think about what did I learn this time, and maybe that's not you. Like a lot of people might need to track that differently. Like they might need to actually go into like a spreadsheet and track things, or they might need to go into a like a notes document and lay things out. It kind of just depends on who you are, I think, and like what you feel comfortable, how you feel comfortable holding yourself accountable. But I think the best way to do it outside of the things that I mentioned is talk to somebody about it. Like, because when you have somebody else that like is invested in your improvement, it's really easy to do that. And that's why I think making the decision with other people to improve at Magic is like the best way to make the decision. It was going to be another point that I brought up.
I think what you said about having other people is really important, especially like if you just reach out, whether it be on like a Discord server or just like your local friend group or whatever. Chances are you're going to find at least one or two people that have not just similar goals to you in Magic, but likely the exact same ones. And because like it's so easy to find people that have literally the exact same goals as you, if you can find those people and establish some point of communication, it really works. And that's not just for Magic too, that's for life. Another thing that I think is like really good as far as like finding those goals and making sure that they're measurable and attainable. Something that I've been doing just in like my everyday life is like every morning when I wake up, I write down just like a few thoughts, and before I go to bed, I like reflect on those thoughts and write down like what I think about those. Just kind of like, this is what I want to accomplish this day, and did I accomplish those?
Are those like daily goals that you set up, or?
Yeah, or just like so it's like, you know, like if I'm like feeling very motivated that day, like whenever I wake up, it's like, all right, like I'm feeling motivated, and then at the end of the day, if I write down everything that I did, like it kind of helps me like feel more in touch with that, right? It's like, well, I was feeling motivated. Did that last? Like, what did I actually accomplish with that motivation? And you can do something very similar with Magic, right? Like every time you play, like you might not be in the best headspace, right? So like whenever you start playing Magic, it's like, well, I'm doing this to unwind right now. So if you write that down, and then afterwards, like if you write down how you're feeling, like, oh, I feel like very relaxed, right? Then like, you know, from that session, you might not have learned something, and what you were looking to get out of that particular session is something different than your overall goal. Because I think intentionality is very important with improving.
You know, you mentioned this, and people often ask me about like, you know, ladder stuff, because, you know, when I was doing Mythic Cast, another podcast that we had, and we'll hopefully come back on the network, like, you know, I was getting Mythic every month, and people ask me a lot about ladder stuff, and I was like, I don't play ladder to improve. And they're like, well, how do you practice? I was like, I go into leagues. Like, I don't actually think that you can possibly measure any sort of learning on ladder and things like that. And
Right.
people are like, well, those leagues are like, the competition isn't good. I was like, I don't actually know that the competition needs to be that good for me to self-reflect as far as those like thousand gold events are on Arena. And, you know, the way that you start to have to measure yourself is those moments where you're not playing in those, right? Like those moments where you're playing those tougher events that you're more excited about, you know, the PTQs or the challenges. Like if you play a standard challenge online or a pauper challenge, like, have you been developing yourself in the way that you need to be more successful in those as you know, within a range as you were before. So I think that understanding your goals, and then understanding is the norm actually helpful for my goals, because we're not in a place in Magic right now where I think that it's actually, Pauper's in a great place, I think, for what it's worth competitively, where I think whether you're playing leagues or challenges, or even your paper events, you're probably going to get to play against the decks that you need to play against, and you can just, you know, set your goals accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful.
My second one is having a plan. I think that I had a hard time writing this down, not because having a plan is not important, because I didn't know if I wanted to pitch this as having a plan or knowing your role. But I think that having a plan goes into knowing your role. Because if you are to the point where you have a plan in a game of Magic, you know what you want your role to be. And I will say that if you don't know what you want your role to be, you actually probably don't have a plan. And maybe that sounds like a little confusing, but in honesty, like if you don't know what your role is in a given moment of Magic, you don't have a good game plan. Like you actually just don't know what you're doing. And that's not to be like rude, it's just true. And I think that like getting to the point where when you're sleeving up when you've sleeved up your deck and you sit up from your opponent, you need to be able to tell somebody else what you thought your role was in a given matchup. I think that is one of the best ways to improve the game.
Whenever you are kind of deciding the plan, is it like a game by game basis for you, or is it more of like going into an event like you want to know all of your plans beforehand for each matchup? Does it
That's a good question.
Depend on the deck you're playing?
We did. It's so funny because the last two of the last couple podcasts on constructor criticism were, planning ahead with Alexander Hain and building your own sideboard guide. And I think that the number one thing that people will do right now with content creators is they will ask for a sideboard guide. And I basically never want to give it to them. And it's not that I don't want to give it to them because I don't think that it helps them in their individual event. I just think it makes people worse at Magic. Because I don't believe that they're doing with that sideboard guide what they should be doing, which is using it to practice the deck, adjusting the sideboard for their event, and then kind of moving forward. And while sideboard guides can be helpful, unless you know why you're boarding in those cards, like we talked about how if you don't have a role, if you don't know your role, you don't really know what's going on. So if I have you on the play and on the draw boarding differently, but you don't know why that's happening, that sideboard plan actually doesn't help you that much. It's not even that good of a sideboard plan. Because if I'm making you more aggressive on the play, or if I am worried about a certain 4-drop on the play, and you don't know that, then the sideboard plan can almost be useless. So to me, it is kind of it's a holistic approach that you have to adjust on a game-by-game basis live. But just having a plan is probably better than having no plan, which is why those sideboard guides do help people.
So whenever you get to the end of an event or an end of a playing session, what steps do you take to determine how you feel about your plans in retrospect? Because I think it would be foolish to pretend that we haven't all went into a Magic event with what we thought were good plans, and then leave the event going, oh man, these plans were terrible.
Right, or end up on the complete opposite end of what the plans were.
So how do you sort of reflect upon that and make sure you're coming to good decisions?
And I don't mean to interrupt, but as far as plan goes, I don't think it's as easy as I'm driving to this event and my plan is to play Tortured Existence and my plan is to win the tournament. And if I don't do that, my plan failed. You know what I'm saying? I don't think it's as easy as that.
I think setting realistic goals is really important to pacing yourself and improving at Magic. And it's part of that making the decision process where if you're going to make the decision to improve at Magic, you're going to lose a lot. And one of the videos that I did on this exact how to improve at Magic topic was being okay with losing. Because if you're not okay with losing, you're going to be miserable. For context, the best Smash player in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, his name is MK Leo. And he has not taken worse than third place at an event ever since the game came out.
Wow.
that's not what happens in Magic. That's just not the game you're coming into here.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming into a game where the best players in the world have a 66% win percentage at the Pro Tour. You're not entering this world in which you're just going to dominate people that you're better than. You're not. That's not the game we're playing. We're playing a game where your goal shouldn't be... I mean, here's the thing. I'm not going to lie. I go to a local 1K, my plan is to win the event.
Sure.
But if I don't win the event, I didn't fail. I think that if I played poorly and cost myself money, I failed. But if I don't win, I didn't fail. And those are different things.
I think a lot of people get confused. There should be a pretty standard difference between a hope, a wish, and a plan.
I also think that when I'm talking about having a plan, I'm not really talking about your goals for an individual event or even your goals for an individual year. I'm talking about in this game of Magic, your opponent is playing mono white. you're playing Scred. You need to know what your plan is in that matchup.
Right.
If you don't know what your plan is, take some time to write one down. Share it in the Heezy Game Media Discord. Like, get feedback. There's so much that goes into like creating a game plan for yourself that is going to help you win matches of Magic. And in all honesty, like, people are like, oh, it's Pauper, I don't want to take it too seriously, but like that's fine. That's fine, but it's just not what we're talking about today. Like, today we're talking about improving the game. I think the last one is remembering to go back to basics. I come back to this a lot on constructive criticism, but we've all learned. I had an event, or actually I had a couple of months when I was coming back to Magic after a long break at the beginning of the pandemic, where my goal was to make good attacks. It's like, Spencer, you've like played on the Pro Tour, like you've done years and years of podcasts about helping people improve. Like, you're in communications with some of the very, very best Magic players in the world and of all time. Like, how is that possibly your goal? And it's because sometimes you just need to like take a step back and just say, am I at a place where I understand combat in this format? Am I in a place where I understand the basics of what it takes to win a game of Magic? And if you're not, that's okay. Just take the time you need to like reflect, notice if you have a weakness in the basics. I almost put making good mulligan decisions or disciplined mulligan decisions in this place, but because that's a basic, I decided to go broader. But in all honesty, Michael Hinderrocker, the Hinder Father as we call him, former host of Constructive Criticism, works at WotC now, designing these awesome cards that we're all playing with. When he was making his run at the Pro Tour, one of the things that he said is, the one thing that I've learned that has helped me so much in like local PTQs and at GPs is just that people make bad mulligan decisions, and if you just don't do that, you have a huge advantage. And so I think anytime that you can make sure that you're playing disciplined basic Magic, I think that you give yourself a pretty wide advantage. And so going back to the basics and reflecting on how you're doing in those type of situations and in those type of moments is going to give you a pretty huge advantage.
I appreciate that. Whenever you kind of think about the basics, like obviously having a short list, I think seems kind of silly for talking about like just the basics in general. But whenever you're working on those, do you work on them like one at a time until like you feel pretty comfortable with them? Or do you kind of just go back to like, I need to reflect on all of the basics altogether?
That's a good question. I have kind of a weird answer. There is a article series by Reed Duke that he took over from Mike Flores. For those who don't might know, Mike Flores is a longtime Magic writer. He wrote one of the most quoted, famous Magic articles of all time. I don't remember if it was called "Who's the Beatdown" or "The Theory of Fire 2," but that article is you should read it. It's great. And so when Mike stopped writing for Wizards, Reed Duke took over that column. So Reed Duke has a series called Level 1. If you actually just type in Reed Duke Level 1 on Google, it is the first thing that pops up. Like, straight up, I'll just read some of these for the listeners. It's, the basics like what is Magic, basics of mana, basics of card advantage. Then he's got gameplay concepts, attacking and blocking, tempo versus card advantage, linear strategies. Then he's got archetype breaks down, aggro decks, control decks, mid-range decks. There's a lot of apps, if you're a podcast listener, something that I did quite a bit a while ago. I'll probably do it again this coming year, that let you pull articles in and it will just read you the article. So like, instead of having your normal podcast, I would actually listen to the entire course just to like reflect on like, okay, what are these things that I think I need to work on right now that Reed is talking about? And it's funny, right? Because like, I probably listened to or read these articles now 7 times, but the structure of like where I am at in my Magic life versus where I was last time is completely different. So I might have a different takeaway this time. So I actually usually will consume these articles to remind myself to help myself decide where to start.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'm actually I didn't know those sort of apps existed, so I'm very interested in it. I'm always looking for
There's
stuff
some good
to
ones.
listen to.
The free ones can be a little rough. I paid
Sure.
for one for a while on iPhone that was pretty good. I have not used one since I switched to my Google Pixel. But if I find a good one, I'll be sure to let listeners know if they let me know they want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested in that.
I really miss the days when Channel Fireball would have their articles that they would.
I loved it. Yes,
Dude,
every
it
week.
was so great.
It was so good. Yep.
It was
Yep.
it was my favorite thing. I even told the guy that read them, I was like, dude, this is my favorite piece of Magic content.
Yep. I used to listen to them all the time. That was actually part of the inspiration for the little This Weekend podcast mini episodes that I do. We got about 5 minutes left in this recording session.
One thing, as we're kind of talking about this, that I would encourage listeners to do also, that's a little bit off topic before we move on to the next person's thing. There's a Harvard Business Review bestseller book, whatever, that you should all listen to or read if you prefer reading. But it's called Managing Oneself. And it actually talks about this exact concept of like, you know, Christian, you just asked me like what I do, right? And to reflect on this. But the truth is like we're all individual humans and we need to do a couple things. One, we need to understand ourselves and how to manage ourselves and manage ourselves according to like the expectations and the differences of people around us. And this book talks about that. It's a really good one. And it like didn't just help me in my career, but it was one of the biggest catalysts of my career change. But it also helped me in Magic, in like understanding how to work with other people in Magic, and how to kind of communicate with others and understand that like just because Matt Kling, a friend of mine, plays Smash differently than me doesn't mean his way is wrong. I just have to understand what I need to do to communicate to get the information that I need out of him to help me get better at Smash. And the same thing is true in Magic.
I think that book would be a very interesting read. What was the name for it one more time, just for me and the listeners?
It's called Managing Oneself. It is really short. It's by Peter Drucker. It is absolutely amazing. I have probably listened to / read this book like 15 times. It's
Excellent.
really short. It's really easy to read. But I think that like if you're interested in the type of things that like I was just talking about and like working with other people and like making those decisions and it's a really impressive read and it's one of the top 10 Harvard HBR books. So
Awesome.
Well, yeah, so those were Spencer's 3 ways to improve. Just to recap them, make the decision to improve at Magic. That is step 1, is actually make the decision and commit to it. And then have a plan, and then remembering to go back to the basics, a la making good attacks, good mulligan decisions, understanding how mana works. My first one out of my 3 ways to improve is one that took me a very long time to learn, and that's make sure that you're having fun. I think that this is true of improving at most things, at least for me. If I am not having some amount of fun doing something or garnering some amount of satisfaction from it, it's just really hard for me to stay committed to improving.
Yeah, it's hard to absorb or learn anything if you're not somewhat invested entertainment wise.
Yeah, and something else is like if you're not having fun doing something, a lot of times you might not notice it immediately, but you'll notice that you'll actually get worse at it. So there was a time in my life in which I was not doing the best mentally, and I really also just was not having fun playing Magic at the time, but kind of like forced myself to play anyways, just because like I always thought like, well, I don't really like have anything else going on. And I noticed after like 2 months of that, like after my mental health started to improve a little bit, that I'd actually gotten a lot worse at the game because I was no longer thinking about the games because it was something that I was doing to fill the time and not because it was something that I wanted to do.
Right.
This really resonates with me. It's something that's really hard for me. Here's the thing. I don't know where we're at in the point of the common knowledge relationship with Spencer Howland, where like, I don't know if people know who I am, what I'm about, like, you know, you guys pull in awesome podcast numbers all the time, and I have no idea if people are like, yeah, I know who this Spencer guy is. Like, I know that this is their boss. But like, you know, I think that for me, when I think about this concept, it's sometimes really hard for me because Magic is so engaging that I don't think that I notice that I'm not having fun until I get mad. But one of the things that I learned this year through a different game, which I've already mentioned on this podcast, which is Smash Brothers Ultimate, is I notice pretty quickly when I'm not having fun in that game. And it actually helped me take a step back from Magic and like look at, okay, are you actually in the mental space right now to be playing Magic with the right goals? And you actually said something really important earlier in the show, Christian, where you said it's okay if like you weren't meeting your goals, if you had a different goal in that session. So like I talked about ladder play, right? Like if I'm playing ladder, I'm doing it because I just want to play some Magic or because I want to get mythic. But I'm not doing it to improve the game. And I think that it's really important to like understand what your goal is. If you've made that decision to get better at Magic, you need to understand what your goal is at the time that you're playing. Otherwise, you're going to probably make yourself mad.
I think you're absolutely right.
Kind of branching off of this as well, just to kind of like dig into the topic just like a little bit deeper. Understanding like your emotions is a very hard thing to do for a lot of people, including myself. And that's why, like I said, like writing stuff down is something that really works well for me. Like if I go to play Magic and I write down how I'm feeling beforehand, like it helps me very much encapsulate more like what's going on, because like you don't want to have 10 sessions where you're playing Magic and you're just not feeling it, not super happy, and the entire time you didn't know that, because that has definitely happened to me before. And you kind of mentioned that it used to be a problem with you where like you wouldn't know that you weren't having fun for a really long time, and just having some way to like get that from your mind or your body onto something that you can visualize is really, really helpful. I don't know if it'll be helpful for anyone else, but it's helpful for me.
And also, just so you know, people like me who have dysgraphia and can't write stuff down, there are other ways to do that. Like you could speak to somebody about this stuff if that's how you need to do it. You can also like type it. Is one that works for some people with writing disabilities, but there are other ways to achieve this without it being writing.
Right.
But I think the concept itself is pretty strong.
Yeah, like you said, it definitely doesn't have to be writing. It's just what I personally do. But then kind of getting into my second one is actually something your co-host Spencer Mason, he says it a lot on the show, but he also said it to me once in person.
I heard that guy is 6'2" and single. Is that true?
Yeah, he is. He also drives a Tesla.
That's the rumor.
And he streams a lot of nights on Twitch. I don't know his exact stream schedule though. But he basically said it to me like a couple of years ago now, and it like blew my mind at the time. Where like we were talking about Magic, and I was like, "How do you like find the time to like play so much?" He was like, "Well, I just play a bunch of games in my head," and it was just like, "Oh my goodness!" And just to clarify, like thinking about the games when you're not playing the games, it's not something you should always be doing. Like if you're at work, you should probably be focusing on work.
I do this in bed. I do this in bed all the time. He actually pitched this as a spoiler alert. We're doing an episode on this exact thing, so it's funny you're bringing it up. But he pitched this not too long ago, and I was like trying to understand what he meant. And then when they explained it to me, I was like, "Oh, I do this in bed like every other night, just like laying in bed playing games of Magic."
Yeah, and to be clear, right? Like it's not like the ideal scenario. Like you're like, man, when I play Infect tomorrow, I'm not going to go turn 1 Glistener Elf, turn 2 Forest Groundswell, Mutagenic Growth, and like you just think about that games 1,000 times. It's not that. Spencer, since you have had the conversation with Mason most recently, do you kind of want to share, not in full because I know you guys are going to do a show about it, but just like sort of what you guys discovered from discussing it?
We didn't go too deep in it. I will share this because it's funny that was his answer. When I was working nights, I used to work in homes of mentally handicapped individuals. We got group homes for them, and we would basically work there to kind of be their support system and stuff like that. And sometimes I would work graves about 3 to 4 days a week. And I used to bring like just 2 Magic decks with me. And like some nights I would just straight up play 8 hours of Magic while those kids were asleep, or while those people were asleep, against myself. So while Mason's solution is cute, I don't know that it's like the only way to do this. But I think one of the things that, is really impressive here is like your ability to like problem solve and like build puzzles in your head of games of Magic. Like, what would I do if this happened? What would I do if this happened? yeah, it's doing a couple things. First of all, it's actually making you play both sides of the matchup, which in playtesting when we were testing for Pro Tours, we did that constantly. We would just switch decks so that we would always be playing both sides of a matchup. And when you do that, like you really, even just in your head, you're like really opening up a lot of different avenues. One, you're figuring out. We talked about having a plan earlier, but like if I'm playing both sides of a matchup, I know if my plan is effective on one side or the other, and I also know like what I care about in the matchup. So like if I care about a certain planeswalker resolving, or I guess we're a Pauper podcast, if I care about a certain spell resolving, understanding that can be really important to like making it happen for myself.
Yeah, and kind of going back to one of your points about making sure like you have a plan. If you ever struggle to understand like what your plan is or what it should be, discovering what you think your opponent's plan is a really good way to reverse engineer your own, which is sort of what I think you were getting at. But
no, it's true. This week on our podcast, Alex Hain, he said he made a comparison to like when you level up doing mazes as a kid, and all of a sudden you start working from the middle instead of the outside. And I think that it literally blew Abe's mind. Like he was like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah. And then my third one is, again, sort of like a broad thing, more like personal life stuff, I guess, that I've been trying to work on more as recently, which is make sure your actions reflect your plans. Something that I've been trying really hard on in Magic recently is to improve playing aggressive decks. And the difference between what I'm doing this time and the last time I tried to improve playing decks that I view as more aggressive is this time I'm actually playing games with aggressive decks. That sounds really, really dumb, but the first time I tried to improve playing aggro decks, I played like 90% of the matches that I played still playing control decks. And this time I haven't touched like a control or mid-range or combo deck in a very long time outside of like the blue-black fairies, mirrors, and like a few like offhand times. And like you can definitely notice yourself improve as long as like you actually take the steps to achieve whatever goal you have.
No, I think that's a good one. I know the last time we recorded, it was right after that online tournament, and I think my match one, game one is a perfect example of what not to do. You said you make sure that your actions reflect your plans. Well, this was an open deck list tournament, and as soon as I saw that my opponent was on Boggles, I kind of knew in my head what I needed to do from the get-go. But game one, my opening hand, I didn't mulligan. I kept a hand with 2 Searing Blazes in it. That does me no good against Boggles. Like, I completely went against my own plan. You know what I mean? So that's what you don't do.
Yeah, and it's something that's like really easy to do on an individual basis, right? Where it's like, just sticking with, I guess my example or even your example, right? Is like, I want to like improve a lot at playing aggro decks, right? And it's like, well, the 3 decks that I'm thinking about playing right now are mono green, burn, and blue red fairies, right? It's like on an individual level, it's really easy to pick blue red fairies. But if I've went like a month and 90% of the matches I'm playing are with blue-red fairies, right? Then I should notice. So while it's true, like an individual instance of like keeping the hands with Searing Blazes, right, isn't like sticking with your plan, it would have been even more of a problem if you played Boggles 4 times in that event and always kept every hand that had Searing Blaze
and did the same thing over and over and over. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, thankfully it was only that one time. I could chalk it up to nerves or just not paying attention or what have you.
Dude, this is so funny. I had goals for years to try and get better at playing aggressive decks, and it actually wasn't till the last basically the pandemic that I forced myself to do it. And what would happen is I'd make this goal to get better at aggressive decks. All that would happen is I would like load up mono red, sideboard into red mid range every match, and I'd win some matches, but then I'd go play the deck in an event and get crushed. I'm like, I don't get it. And like, I just thought to myself, I was like, why are you losing all these games? And it's like, well, why do your deck lists look so different? And it's like, well, it's because I'm trying to board into red mid range every time. Yeah. And eventually I was like, okay, stop playing red. I told myself to stop playing red. I switched to playing mono white a bunch. I came back to doing Mythicast. I did podcasts on mono white aggro, mono red aggro, like all of these like very different decks than were typically my style, and forced myself to like all right, you can't lean on the crutch of boarding in Experimental Frenzy or Chandra or whatever. Like, you're gonna actually be the beatdown. It took both realizing that I was not doing my goal. Like, my goal was so much, like, I was doing so much worse than even you, Christian, because I'm like straight up ruining the entire goal by sideboarding in 11 mid-range cards in my mono red deck to be the mid-range deck.
I don't know. It's funny that you mentioned that, because something like kind of like baked into your anecdote, Spencer, is something else that I think is very important, which is just in general figuring out which unique solution is going to work for you, right? So like we're talking about like how your deck lists were kind of like looking different, and so you decided to just switch decks entirely to like a mono white aggro or mono green. But like
right, it doesn't really matter what I'm playing if my goal is to learn aggro, right? I think we should call that out. Like, if my goal is to learn to play aggro, I can play any aggressive deck and like try and gain nuggets of information. But if one of them leans too hard into other things, it's important to kind of call that out.
Yeah, so like another solution could have been like, I want to switch formats, right? Play an aggressive deck in a different format. Or I'm just going to copy somebody else's deck list card for card. That way I can't put like 13 mid-range cards in my sideboard or whatever, you know? So just like also assessing the problem and figuring out which solution is going to work best for you is another thing that I think a lot of people hear one solution and go, okay, I'm going to go with that solution, without thinking like, what ways could this solution not work for me personally? Yeah, that was my 3, just to recap them. Make sure you're having fun whenever you play Magic or really do anything is going to put you in the right headspace to improve most of the time, I think. Do as much thinking about the games before the games as you can. You know, play games in your head, think about what matchups look like, create really complex puzzles in games, and really like get in there as much as you can. When safe, of course. Don't do it while driving. And then make sure your actions reflect your plans.
Clearly, you have never just ended up in work and just completely wondered how you got there, but you did cast Scape Shift 15 times on turn 4. Right. In a different way every time. I don't know.
Yep.
That couldn't be me. I could never tell you who did that.
But yeah, so now we can get on to Brad himself.
All right, my 3. They're not going to vary a whole lot from what you guys had in your list, but my number 1 is pretty straightforward. It's I put down pick a path and decide what aspect of that hobby or game or trade that you want to improve on. It's real easy for me anyway to say, I want to get better at building houses. You can't just like get better at building houses. You know, you have to get better at, okay, well, I need to learn how to make cement, or I need to learn how to measure better, or, you know what I mean? The little things that go into that big picture. I fall into that a lot with, I need to get better at art, at drawing, at painting, at whatever it is. But I find myself not picking a specific fundamental problem and working on that to get better, as opposed to, I'm really bad at painting. I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to paint until I'm Salvador Dali. Well, that's just not how it works. You know, you gotta work on the small aspects to make the big picture better. You know, whether it's your color palette or your lines or your stenciling or your perspective, you know, just anything like that. And I think that all applies to Magic as well. You know, I can't just say, well, I want to get better at leagues. I want to get better at profiting or having winning records in leagues. I don't think it works that way. You know, it starts with everything you guys have already talked about. Well, to get better at leagues, you got to start with mulligans and better attacks and better choices of discard depending on your deck. Just those sort of things. Does that make sense?
It does. Mm-hmm. I want to add to this because I think that what this is a really common problem, just humans, is I don't think people understand the difference between like having a goal of making money in leagues is not the same thing as as like the things that lead up to achieving that goal, right? And you know, if your goal is to, you know, have a winning record in leagues, let's just say that you want to try to win 60% of your leagues in 2020, or wow, what year is it? 2022. I hate life. I am so upset now.
Still is.
It's in not March of 2019 anymore, guys. But like, if that's your goal, right, and you want to have that happen, Now it's time to make a plan. Kind of, I think that's why you interpreted it, what I said is that way, for what it's worth, Brad, is this is the time to make that kind of plan, right?
Yep.
It's like, okay, what are the things that need to be true in order for me to achieve that goal? And I think that, honestly, I would throw it back to, like, if you can't say with confidence that the things in those Reduke Level 1 articles are true about you, especially in Pauper, where the format's super diverse, there's tons of different types of decks, every archetype is covered, you probably aren't going to achieve that goal.
Yeah, number 2, both of you guys had already touched on that, but mainly I think Spencer did when he started this main topic, is to track your results. If I could, I would track on a spreadsheet every movement of my day from waking up to going to sleep. I'm just that type of person. Like, if I could somehow track on a spreadsheet, Monday I bought a Dr. Pepper from the vending machine at 9:37, and then Tuesday I bought one at 10:32, and how those two decisions affected each individual day, I would track that. And I would watch those results, and I would learn from it. So I'm the type of person that gets carried away with tracking results. So when it comes down to Magic, I need to know, why did I mulligan? How far did I mulligan down to? What were the cards in my hand that made me mulligan? What was my opponent on? Did they mulligan? Just those sort of things. And I feel like I don't know when to rein it in as far as tracking goes, because at some point tracking isn't going to teach you anything more than it's just text on a page that tells you what happened.
Can I give you some advice as somebody who's done it? Yeah, we had a team Oasis games for a little while, and we tracked everything. We had win percentage calculators in a Google Doc. I actually posted a link to the calculator in the He's a Game Media Discord. So if you ever want to track results of an individual deck versus every other deck, I believe there's a spreadsheet and it just auto calculates for you. But one thing that you got to be really careful about is burnout. If your goal, for example, is that league's goal, we'll just use the same one. You should only track your leagues. Like, you shouldn't track anything else. And the reason for that is, like, there's already so much mental strain on you in a game of Magic. The what you don't want to do is, after your game of Magic, feel so deflated and still have to do this other thing.
Right. You still have to pile all that into a spreadsheet or onto your notepad or whatever.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not a great solution for this right now, I think, on MTGO, especially if you're going to combine your paper results. That's just definitely not going to happen. But, understanding, like, okay, what are my goals today? And do I need to track those is probably better than making a goal to, like, track everything you do in Magic for a year. That in itself is a daunting task.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's not for other
people.
Maybe I'm barking up a tree.
Totally
Brad's
right.
like, no, dude, that sounds great. I would love that.
It does sound great, but I know from experience on trying to track other things that would just be a nightmare. So maybe my number 2 isn't so much track the results, but understand, be able to glean something from the results that you are sort of tracking, not hyper obsessively tracking.
Something else, just to kind of add to it, is also kind of like understand what the results are, is something that I think a lot of people really miss, right? Is it's possible, highly unlikely, but possible, that you start working on just improving your mulligan decisions, and you have a session or two where you make near perfect mulligan decisions and also lose every game.
Sure.
And so kind of like not just looking at the results, but also thinking about like the thought process in each individual instance is probably going to go a lot further than having a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers on it, which, like you sort of already talked about, is like on your spreadsheets. And I've also seen them, for what it's worth. You like write down like your thought process and
they go deep.
Everything. They definitely do. Like I said, I've seen them.
As somebody who's done this, that sounds exhausting.
It is. But
can I ask you what your goal is with that? Like, what do you hope to learn from writing everything that detailed down?
I don't know if I have a specific answer for that, other than I know that I forget menial things, or at least things that I think are menial at the time, and they end up being a big deal, sort of thing. I'll lose a match tonight, and then Christian will ask me about it tomorrow, and he'll be like, "Well, why'd you lose game 2?" And I'll be like, "I don't know what happened in game 2. I can't tell you."
I do that too.
I think it's more just a memory thing, just my own personal short-term memory issues, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like especially helpful, right? Like, for example, Brad played Burn with Reckless Impulse and fairly large event recently, and I had been practicing a lot with the deck. And when we were kind of discussing it, just like offhand, I think we could actually like see it in our messages. He had made a mulligan decision, and I was kind of like interested in like what the thought process was behind it, but like we didn't really remember like the exact thought process, and so we just kind of had to assume things that it could have been. You know what I mean?
Yep. Basically, yeah, for stuff like that. And I think what you were talking about, Christian, plays a lot into it, especially if you ever tried to brew a deck and you're like, oh, I brewed this from scratch. You know, I didn't tweak a tier deck or anything. It's just brand new deck that no one's ever heard of. And I lost 9 out of 10 matches and it's terrible. I'm never going to go back to it ever again. You know, that's not a true assessment or true answer for what that deck could be. And maybe it is terrible. Maybe it'll lose 99% of the games it plays. But I don't think small sample sizes, regardless of how good or bad the deck is, regardless of how good or bad your mulligan decisions were, are a true example of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Do you want to go ahead and hop into what your third thing was?
Yeah, pretty much just like Spencer and yours a little bit too. I think when you get off track, I think the most important part is to identify that you're off track. You know, that, okay, for these first 6 matches, I was really, really focused on getting better at mulliganing and why I made the decisions I did. But then I got on this losing spree, this losing bender, and now I'm pissed, and now I'm just playing, and I forgot what I was started to do 3 hours ago. And, oh yeah, you know, I wanted to work on mulligans. Like, identify the problem and get back to those, either the fundamentals as a whole, like we touched on earlier, or your specific problem. Maybe you're just fed up with working on mulligans for the night. You know, jump over to something of the same level, the same fundamental level, but just different. It's just a recentering. Just recenter yourself a little bit.
I want to go back to your brewing example. I don't know if people know this about me, but like that was like my calling card in Magic for a long time. Like I loved just brewing decks. And if you don't do this when you're brewing, so like this comes up a lot for me because I still brew decks just like for fun. And if you like, something that can really easily happen, like really easily, is you'll go play 3 matches with your deck. You won't play against any of the decks that you like or thinking about when brewing the deck, and then you're like, this deck sucks. And it's like, well, does it suck? Do you expect to run into those decks? And it's hard. It's hard to like kind of center yourself a little bit and say, oh, this actually was maybe a little bit of waste of time, and just be honest that that's what it is. Mm-hmm. Like, it's okay. You can't really suffer from the sunk cost fallacy. Yeah. You've got to just admit when things didn't go the way you expected, and maybe try again next time, and maybe switch up from your brew so that you don't have tainted views of the results.
Being a brewer is a lot of being honest with yourself, painfully so.
Yeah, that's why you gotta be like me and just wait for Brad to send you the awesome deck list.
That's right. I'm still waiting to send you one.
Hey man, I gave my entire team the state's winning deck list in 2012.
Did anybody play it other than you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The whole team played it.
Well, I mean, I'm glad the whole team played it, but wouldn't it be like,
are you assuming that I won? Are you assuming that I won that state championship?
Did you not?
I did.
You're like, don't you know? I won every state championship I played in, and the only one that I didn't win, I scooped my way out of it to go have a date.
Right.
Hold on. Time out. That is not true.
That's not true.
I once played Brad Nelson's and Todd Anderson's terrible goggles deck at States instead of like a real ramp deck, and that was like that was one of my worst performances ever. So it's just what you said is just definitely not true.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know how true it was, but the more true it was, the better it was going to be. Yeah.
I have won every states that I have top 8'd but one.
Okay.
If
Very
that helps
nice.
you.
Hey, it's impressive to win any states. It's impressive to top 8 any states. But yeah, so that was kind of like the 9 things that we came up with collectively but individually to help people improve in Magic. Anybody have any like last words on any of them?
Oh, can I have a bonus 10 so that the title of this video can be 10 things to help you improve at
Yes.
Magic?
I was thinking
should.
the title of this video could be Always Improving, but sure.
Oh,
That's fine.
it's way less clickbait.
We'll do the 10th one, and then we'll do the clickbait title, and we'll feel bad
Yep.
about it.
10 things you didn't know about improving.
I would say like the 10th thing that I would say that hasn't been mentioned specifically for Magic is just like you need to be able to like talk to people. And I know for a lot of Magic players that's hard, but like this game is so hard, and the people that are getting better than you are getting better than you with other people. And I promise you, if you come to the He's a Game Media Discord, if you come to the CC MTG Discord, if you're a patron of, I'm pretty sure we still have a patron community for the Common Knowledge podcast. I promise you that like there are going to be people there that have similar minds to you. You need to surround yourself with those type of people, but you also need to be willing to be wrong and accept feedback, because you will not get better without doing
And
that.
you're talking about actually talking to people, not taking the Twitch chat, not taking the YouTube comments. You know, you
No,
mean, like,
you need to straight up just be inside of a community that their goal is to get better at Magic the Gathering.
like-minded individuals.
I definitely agree. The two times in which I got like improved the most, the quickest, were one when Spencer and I used to talk a lot, not necessarily about Magic, about Smash, but the thought processes of improving at Smash really like translate well to the thought processes behind improving at Magic.
They really do.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I've thought about that a lot. I bring up Smash so much now, and I think that for me, a lot of it's like, it's the thing that I'm trying to improve at that I think relates to listeners a little bit better. But also, I just think that like the things that you need to do to improve at anything as a person are like, they translate really well from Smash into Magic for some reason, where you're just able to communicate like, yeah, I mean, there's so much, right? Like it's matchup stuff, archetypal stuff, and the thing is that for those who don't know, like I talked about MKLeo. It's funny during this recording, my friend Matt Kling actually texted me about MKLeo. He's like, dude, he's so like insane. I'm like, yeah, it's unreal. But the thing that translates the reason it translates so well is because you move from this game with variance into this game without variance, and it's really easy to just explain to people, okay, let's pretend that we got to remove variance from Magic. Here's what that looks like. And that's kind of what Smash gets to turn into for you. I don't want to turn this into a Smash podcast, but I think that that's like really valuable to get to do that. I know a lot of people, their analog might be chess, stuff like that, but for me it's Smash. But like having that analog, that zero variance analog, I actually think it's pretty valuable.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going. I want to hear about the 2 times you improved it at Magic the most.
Yeah, so there was that time, right, like where we just talked about the concept of improvement in general a lot. Like,
I thought for sure you were going to say the time where I played that league with you.
Yeah, so for what it's worth, there was a lot of improvement there as well. But yeah, just like the time in which like it had to have been like at least 2 or 3 times a week in which we would talk about just the concept of improving. And then another time it's been recently, where not only have I been playing, but I've had a few local friends that have been asking me a lot about like what I think about like the state of Magic and like how I'm doing in Magic, as well as just getting to talk to like Brad and Fernando and everything, and just sharing ideas with each other. Like I've noticed like just measurably, both in results and how positive I feel about my process, improves a lot whenever you just have trusted individuals to go to.
It's so funny because I think people think that they need to like get into this friend group with like these insane ringers, right? And like, how many insane ringers is that true for? None of them. So how did that happen? They got together with people that were like-minded. They improved together, got good, and suddenly those ringers wanted to work with them. It's like, the thing is, it's like a ladder. This happens all the time in Smash. For what it's worth, I'm just gonna bring up Smash again. Like right now, Matt Kling better at Smash than me. Not even 3 weeks ago, when I got my new contacts, I was like all motivated, I was like, dude, I'm gonna crush you when we play. Just obliterated this guy. Like, we played 2 sessions, kicked his butt. The dude has done nothing but play Smash for 2 weeks, and now he I can't beat him. It is a ladder, right? Like, when you get better at Magic, when your best friend wins a PTQ or wins or top 8's a Pauper challenge or wins a Pauper challenge, it motivates you to talk to them about their event, learn from their learnings of that high level play, and then it'll catapult you. It is so important to surround yourself with like-minded people.
I definitely agree. So that was the 10 things that you can do to improve at Magic today, TM.
Today.
No clickbait here.
Yeah.
Today, not. Now we're just lying,
right? And that's also going to do it for this episode of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate Extravaganza.
Ooh.
If you would like to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JustGuyDad. Brad, where can they find you?
At Pauper_B on Twitter or BradDrackV on MTGO.
And Spencer, shout out all your stuff.
You say it like I have so much. You can find me on the Constructive Criticism podcast every week. We are currently every other week for my other podcast, which is the Need to Nerd podcast. It's a podcast about nerd culture. We review movies, we review anime, we review video games. We also just talk about those type of things. It's been a really fun ride with West, my favorite Roy main. And then I do weekly, or it's not weekly. I'm not gonna make any promises. I do content on both the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel and the He's a Game Media YouTube channel. And then you can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. My Facebook and my Instagram are private. I've had to tell a lot of people, like, this is not for you. I'm sorry. But you can follow me there. If you like sports, though, you want to talk fantasy football, follow me at Spencer13 Sports for that content. And then join the Discord. We only had 10 people in our league this year for fantasy football, in which I will be beating. Let's look at the score really quick. Maybe you made a comeback, man.
I definitely didn't make.
We'll drop all those links in the show description too.
Yeah. So currently, if you also want to lose to me by a score of an estimated, dude, you might win, dude. Tom Brady is having literally his worst game ever.
Fernando, keep this in.
Proof. Market.
Straight up, you currently have a 9% chance of winning. Since we started the podcast, your chance of winning went up by 5%. It more than doubled.
Hey, 9 is better than 0.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly.
That is true.
But if you also want to contemplate your role on a D10 against Spencer Howland in fantasy football, join the Discord. We were going to do a fantasy basketball league. I was really excited for it. I know Christian was interested in joining that too. We'll be doing one next week. Fantasy sports is like a really fun way to get into sports for nerds like me, that can't play them anymore. So that is where you can find me. But don't forget to find our editor.
Can I actually answer one of your previous questions, Spencer? You were asking me about my spreadsheets and my need to do them all.
Yeah.
Fantasy sports. Before I got hardcore back into Magic, I was hardcore into fantasy sports, daily fantasy sports, sabermetrics.
Was it baseball?
Sabermetrics, yep. And I'm weaning off of it, but I think I tried too hard to make sabermetrics into Magic the Gathering, and I just can't do that.
Yeah, don't forget to check out our editor as well. He edits 3 of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network right now, and he is amazing. I just want to shout him out.
His name is Fernando. I forget his Twitter handle all the time, but it will definitely be in the description down below, unless one of you knows it offhand.
I don't. I'd have to look.
No, I don't know it offhand. Gotcha. Yeah. Well, just make him feel bad while he's editing while I look it up, though. That I don't remember
got your back, Fernando.
I text it almost every day, so you'd think that I'd remember it. Right. But to be fair, I bet it's something that is, it's just his last name. It's I.F. Port. I don't know how to say this.
Portilada?
Portilada? You better tell me how to say this. Because now I look like an idiot.
Yeah, well, It is that. It's
You can edit like a dunce cap on my head that says "doesn't speak."
Portuguese.
Is it
yeah,
Portuguese or Spanish? Okay. Thanks, everybody.
If you have any questions on the pauper format, MTG,
Or
or anything
Portuguese.
else, or Portuguese, you can leave a comment down below or shoot us an email over at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you have any questions on the pronunciations of Portuguese, though, please just direct all of those at Spencer's handles. Thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for listening. Take very good care of each other.
And never stop improving.